that you are responsible for on this exam. Okay, no, it is. You wouldn't go up. All right. No. Oh, here. Okay. So you know what you have to cover. Now, there's a couple of ways this is communicated to you. The syllabus is one way to begin, and then we're also going to look at Beach Board and see what you have there. But you know that you have been responsible for learning SIMAC. And that's something you just have to have memorized in your mind, right? For the homework, you didn't have to. You could look at the slides. But for the exam, you have to have it memorized and how it is applied to different cases. And we worked together to apply it to the Nestle case. We talked about corporate structure and ethical decision-making within that, for example, in the Pinto case and so forth. We talked about ethics in international business. We talked about ethics in outsourcing, and we'll see in a minute, I've made up for you this 2021 midterms statutory and case review. We did Apple and Foxconn. We did the ethics of consumer protection. We did Honda and Takata airbags. We did Boeing. Okay, so on here, oh, and I should add, I'll have you add what readings you're responsible for. All right, then the dairy case, where most of you did very well. The ethics of criminalizing business conduct. Should these things be crimes? Now, we have the white collar crimes that are violations of the statute. The dairy case is unique because it's saying, should we apply manslaughter to workplace deaths? Manslaughter charges. Where what? Where the degree, there's, Patrick Faria did not intend to kill his two employees, but he was so highly reckless in not providing them with the appropriate information and safety equipment and training. All right, then we talked about financial statement reporting and securities fraud. And there's where the Aaron Beam case was, which was, I think, on pages 49 to 52 in your textbook. You're also responsible for all of Chapter 2. But I'm not going to ask you some remote question from Chapter 2. A lot of the cases that we talk about are in Chapter 2, like Nestle and Aaron Beam, I think, is in Chapter 1. And it also sets the tone from where I drew the SIMAC. All right, and you were responsible for smartest men in the room. Okay, so you start with the syllabus. Then we can look at Beach Board, which I have, I think, up. Where do I have Beach Board? Oh, I had it open. Maybe here. Okay. So I created for you different areas that you can go back and review, right? You're going to be responsible for everything that's here in articles and cases and in PowerPoints. So we have the outsourcing, the Foxconn, My Basic SIMAC, the consumer protection, the ethics of criminalizing business conduct, and the ethics of financial reporting. So these are the PowerPoint slides for which you are responsible. And the articles and cases, to go back to them, we talked about virtually every one of these in some way. Okay? All right. Any questions about what you're responsible for on Beach Board? No? All right. So let's look at the statutory review. This should be it. Let's see. And case review. So I tried to summarize here, right? Obviously, you know you're responsible for SIMAC, but as you know, 150 points are for the CIMAC, and 100 points are going to be for the law question. It's 250 points total. So let's review the law that we have learned together and explored together, right? The ethics of financial reporting. This whole idea that what is the ethical foundation of all of securities law is that we need to have truthful, accurate financial reporting disclosure. Where? In financial statements. And that leads to a level playing field and even bargaining content. Even bargaining power, I mean. Are there any questions on that statute generally? No? So your statute is the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934. And the areas of that statute, it's a very broad statute at this point because it's been amended so many times after every financial crisis, are that it is a civil wrong and a criminal wrong to engage in financial statement misrepresentation. Of course, if it's a criminal wrong, which we'll come to in a moment, you have to be able to prove it was intentional and not accidental. Okay. Then you need to know the sections that are Rule 16A, the conventional insiders. Who can tell me what a conventional insider is?
Like insider trading, like the person that trades information on stuff that the public, they just give like insider trading.
No, you've got the idea, Tony. Very good, right? That they trade on non-material, non-public information, which is in the slide, material, non-public information. Conventionally, it would be someone like in the Enron case that would be a CEO or a CFO, someone that's in the company and that trades knowing that this information may become public. Down below in cases, we talk about the Disney case, the young man that got the information from his girlfriend, not because she shared it with him, but because he stole it. We also have Enron, Aaron Beam, the Disney, and Martha Stewart. And in fact, I think I have one more look for that today, handout that I'm going to post on Beachboard under Martha Stewart. She's the one that worked with Snoop Dogg.
Sorry, may you repeat what's conventional trading again?
Well, which is?
Conventional insider trading.
Insider trading, yes, with conventional insiders. Okay. It's when one party trades securities, it can be a buy or a sell, trades securities on material, non-public information. And go back and look at those slides in that section, absolutely. But the idea is what? It's that who is being harmed on the other side? The party that doesn't have the non-public information, right? Because they might not buy or sell if they knew. So in the, Disney insider trading with the young man, he went in and he knew the stock price was going to go up, Disney, because it was going to merge with Marvel, but the public did not know that. There had not yet been public disclosure. Why? Well, because you have the details of the merger. It's very complex, very legalese, lots of attorneys involved, And so you have those negotiations and preparations going on, sometimes even for months before the information is made public, because they need to get all the details straight to avoid some kind of a breach of contract lawsuit. So the girlfriend was working on this, and she knew that the stock price would go up. She did not tell him, Toby Scammell, but he, through looking at her phone and whatever else documents she had home, he realized that that was going to happen. So he bought stock options. Now, the people that were harmed in that transaction were the people that sold them to him. Because if they knew the stock price was going to jump, what did it jump? Some huge percentage? If they had known the stock price was going to jump, do you think they would have sold to him or waited 3 weeks? Right? They would have waited.
I have a question on that though. I assume when you're selling like stocks, you're not gonna know exactly who you're buying it from because there's so many different stocks. So,
Right. That's
how
why
would they
it
feel?
seems,
How
it
would they
seems-
seem bad?
Go ahead, Danny.
I said, how would they feel bad because trades like this happens every day, like at a very high rate?
Well, often they don't feel bad until they get caught. And yes, that's why it seems like the quote, victimless crime. But there is somebody on the other end of every transaction. And so the point more is to show why it is not a victimless crime and why it is ethically wrong. Does that make sense? But yes,
Yeah.
you're not going to look your, victim in the eye. But in most of these instances, I wonder if the Takata executives ever did see one of the people that they'd so seriously harmed. So then Rule 10B, and you need to know these by number. More insider trading, meaning trading on what kind of information?
Non-public, non-material.
Yes, right? Material, non-public information. Now, make sure that you go back also and look at the civil and criminal penalties involved if you get caught with insider trading. Typically, you have to, it doesn't sound pleasant, but the legal term is disgorge the profits. So you have to give back the profits that you made. And if there are, a class of plaintiffs that were harmed, then there's a trustee and a trust set up, and people have to show how they were harmed, and then they get paid out. So this is for general fraud. So the Martha Stewart case and the Disney case would fall under 10B, where Enron would fall under Rule 16A. Now, who can tell me when you go back to study Rule 16A, how many days do you have in order to report at this time, in order to report that you're trading in your company's securities?
2 days.
2 days,
16.
right? And that's because it used to be 6 months, and by that time the fraud's all over. The idea is to let the public and the SEC know that there is trading by insiders, and that could be a signal to the market that maybe they have some information we don't have, or so forth.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you explain the primary difference between 16A and 10B? I'm a little bit confused what the difference between the two are.
Yeah, so 16A is very specific, and it covers a very specific and small group of people, usually top management, but also any other employees. You're conventional because like let's say you're working for SpaceX and they're about to enter some very lucrative contract with Russia or something to take people up to the space station. Okay. If you know that, you can't trade on SpaceX stock. This 10B is to cover any other frauds that might occur. It's a general anti-fraud. And that's why, like, how did Martha Stewart get her information? Her broker tipped her off. How did the Disney young man get his information? He took it from his girlfriend, her phone, and the documents she had at home. So they traded on material non-public information, but they didn't get the information because they were insiders. They got it some other way. And so you can see there's a realm of possibilities how somebody might get that information. I think I used the example, there's a famous case where the printer was looking at the documents and thought, maybe I can make some money off of this. And indeed, he did get caught. So there's a lot of different ways that people do get detected. Typically, as I said, there are algorithms that the Securities and Exchange Commission uses to determine trading in a security right before there's a public announcement that changes the price of the stock. Now, in Martha Stewart's case, the stock was going down. In the Disney case, the stock was going up. But they would both be under 10B because they were not conventional insiders. They did not work for the companies whose stock they were trading.
That makes sense. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Oh, absolutely, Kim. Thanks for asking.
One question. If there was like
Yeah.
a public leak, like say in the Disney case, the information wasn't supposed to get out, but it like got leaked to the press or something, is that insider information or not really anymore?
If it gets leaked to the press, it's public, isn't it?
Yes. But like
So it
if
fails
it's like
the
quickly
non-pub-
redacted.
Yeah, it fails the non-public part. And material, which you can spend weeks in accounting or finance on materiality, for our purposes is just, it's information that would make a difference in the decision to buy or sell a security. Okay. So there's going to be some big announcement either that's going to cause the stock price to really jump high or jump low.
I have a question also.
Yes, Angelina?
So for the Enron case,
Mm-hmm.
would the falsifying the financial documents from the CFO fall under the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934, and then the like trading or selling of the stock fall under Rule 16A specifically? Is that how
Yes.
that works?
So it's all the Securities and Exchange
Mhm.
Act, right?
Mhm.
It's just that there's a whole section on financial statement misrepresentation. And then, yes, there are other sections you can see. There's a section 10, section 16. It goes
Okay.
on and on. But for the moment, I'm only holding you responsible for the general, which was adopted in 1934, about financial statement misrepresentations. And it has all of the law in there that you have to file quarterly reports of your financial statements, that you have to file 10Ks, annual reports of your financial statements, and so on and so forth. So it has many sections to it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on the financial reporting? Okay, so civil versus criminal law. Look at that, I tell you, look for the slide comparing them. Remember, I created a slide, for example, what is the burden of proof? In a criminal case, you have to prove it, what?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt, right? If it's a civil case, what do you have to prove it by?
Preponderance of the evidence.
Preponderance of the evidence, very good, right? And so to help you with that, I tell you, Beyond a reasonable doubt is about 99% certainty. Why? Why do you have to prove criminal conduct beyond a reasonable doubt?
Because you're revoking the right of freedom.
That's right. The right at stake is so high, right, that we want to be as sure as we possibly can. Now, that does not mean that people have not been wrongly convicted. Before we had DNA evidence, a lot of times people were convicted on eyewitness identification. And we would all think, I'd know, right? If I was the witness to a crime, I'd know. But they have found that especially across races, there is a high tendency that you make a mistake about eyewitness identification. So now we have more scientific ways to determine if someone indeed committed the crime. All right, and remember, very importantly, in addition to the high standard, all the criminal procedure, you know, the right to a jury trial, the right to an attorney, the right to be silent, all of that, go back and look at. It's in your slides on criminal law. Make sure you focus on intent. And I should have added there, so you may want to add for yourselves, and I will also modify this, is in regard to intent, we talked about recklessness. Which cases were not deliberate intent to kill a person, but such a high degree of recklessness?
Takata airbags.
Yep, Takata airbags,
The dairy case.
the dairy case. No one has been criminally charged with Boeing, but we wonder, right, when a full investigation comes out, was anyone being that careless that it would rise to the level of recklessness? And our benchmark example always is drunk driving, where you kill someone, vehicular manslaughter, right? You don't intend when you get in your car to kill someone. In fact, you don't even know that person. But you're so reckless with human life.
Vehicular manslaughter can also be like if you're just like going like 150 miles per hour, right?
Right, or street racing. I think street racing comes under that too. There's some terrible accidents from street racing. Yeah, anything that you could prove to a jury was a high degree of recklessness that would substitute for deliberate intent. And there are, and I'm not going to hold you responsible for that, but there are, you know, levels like premeditated murder and murder in the first degree. And criminal law is a very interesting area to study, and so is criminal procedure, which changes all the time. Are there any general questions on the criminal law? Everyone feels okay with that? All right. We also talked about outsourcing at some length. And we had cases there. The two primary cases that we saw were Nestle and Foxconn. In Nestle, the human rights abuses were occurring in the harvesting of a product. In Foxconn, it was in the manufacturing of a product. But they both were violations of international law, that there has to be a decent wage and working conditions, reasonably safe working conditions according to international law. So, you know, if you're working for a company that's outsourcing in some way, then obviously you have a huge red flag of potential ethical challenge. And that red flag is that how are the people manufacturing your product being treated? And Mattel was another example of this with the lead paint in the toys. Remember that? And so actually we have three cases that would fall under this. And so one of the things, and that's why I include consideration of industry, your industry, the industry of your company for which you work, will dictate a lot of the ethical challenges that you encounter. If you are on a dairy farm with hazardous fumes from manure and manure itself, then you know that safety is one of your primary ethical and legal challenges, right? That's what we had Cal OSHA for. And a beautiful safety plan is of no use if it's not utilized. Just like a code of ethics in Enron, they had that beautiful code of ethics in the lobby, right? But it meant nothing because they weren't living it or implementing it really in any way. And that means from the top down. All right. So that's our section on international law and outsourcing. Then we also talked about product liability. And the flip side of product liability is the duty of the manufacturer of a product towards, here the duty is towards the consumer of the product rather than an employee, right? So we've talked about potential physical harm and loss of life in two contexts. One, in terms of employee safety, and the other in terms of product liability. Make sure you go back and look at those slides and look at the two standards of product liability. There's negligence, right? Which is where there's a lack of due care. And there they would have to pay civil penalties. Typically what happens, like with Takata airbags, is there becomes a class of plaintiffs. That plaintiff meaning those who sue. There becomes a class of them, and they have attorneys that represent them all as a class. This would happen with Takata airbags as an example. And then, people would have to prove how much they were damaged. Some people with Takata airbags were damaged with the loss of an eye. Some people lost their life. Some people, it's just that they had to get their bags recalled, their Takata airbags recalled. So now with negligence, the consumer, but that means you're going to have sophisticated attorneys that are representing you usually, must prove accidental fault in design, manufacture, or disclosure of information. So let's imagine you are an Indonesian wife and you lost your husband on the Indonesian Airlines flight that crashed. Who would you sue? And believe me, there'd be attorneys right there where you're all waiting to hear what happened to your loved one. There would be attorneys right there waiting to sign you up. When there's a disaster, there's a reason they're called ambulance chasers. When there's a disaster, they are right there. So imagine that you're an Indonesian wife, your husband has died in this airplane crash, okay? You don't know exactly why that plane crashed, especially in the beginning. Who would you sue to get money damages? Who would you sue in a civil lawsuit for that loss of your loved one?
The airline?
Okay, the airline, Indonesian airline. Now, Indonesian Airlines, which is not that profitable or big of an airline, is going to go bankrupt. They can't afford to pay everybody that's making a claim. Then who would you sue?
The maker of the defective part.
Yes, the maker of the defective part. And in this case, it was Boeing, right, with the airplane. But you're right to point that out, Tony, because, for example, if it happened in a Honda car, it was really the defective part from Takata that was causing the harm. However, since the consumer relies on Honda to make decisions and use due care, right, when choosing their suppliers of their component parts, we could sue Honda as well. Now, the other potential way in some states, right, with the airlines, it's, you know, not necessarily state by state, because there are federal safety transportation laws that regulate the aviation industry. But imagining that it's some other product, some states have strict liability, which means that the manufacturer of the product is liable for money damages regardless of fault. You don't have to prove where the design defect was or anything, right? And the idea, this was a very controversial theory developed by the courts. There isn't a lot of statutory law in product liability generally. And the idea was, look, the consumer knows nothing about how this product is made. Products are becoming more and more sophisticated over time. Therefore, all the power and financial benefit from the product is in the hands of the manufacturer. So if people are injured from the product, right, the manufacturer should pay for those injuries. Now that leaves misuse aside. Remember the guy with the lawnmower that started using the lawnmower to cut his hedge and severely injured himself, right? And remember, that's why we have all those warnings on our hair dryers, that thick tag that you want to get off immediately that says all the things you can't do with the hair dryer, like use it while you're showering. And every one of those warnings is a real case. And their attorneys have said, okay, now that you know that somebody did indeed shower with their hair dryer on and get injured, now you know to warn that it is foreseeable. So if you ever wonder where those warnings come from, they're actual cases. Any questions on product liability?
Is environmental product liability a part of that? Like if damages to the environment? Is that
No,
separate?
we're going to talk about environmental law later. But of course, we see all the time that, especially before there were environmental laws in place, and as you know, we in the South Bay here of Long Beach and the whole South Bay, we have so many refineries and we had so much oil that we are really a hazardous site. And we'll also talk about, and one of my former students, I'm so proud of him, does this, environmental racism, which is an interesting topic, and which means that, of course, the poorer communities, which are often minority communities, suffer the greatest harm from environmental air, land, and water pollution. And I think I said to you, that corridor along the 710 North, where all those trucks are going day and night from the port all over, that is a high level area of pollution and environmental damage. But we'll come to that later. For right now, we're just going to look at the harm to the consumer. All right. Now your SIMAC, right? So in the exam, you're not going to talk about stakeholders, but you're going to start with issues. Don't forget, I saw that students would forget one of these three. You simply need to remember, go back to your basic SIMAC slide that I made for you, and just, you know, remember, and always with systemic. Who can tell me, what does systemic mean? What are systemic factors?
Culture, industry.
Yes, right, government and industry. Right, and it goes back to what I said. what is unique in your industry that's going to lead to your ethical challenges? Oh, well, it's a dairy farm and there's, methane gases and open manure lagoons. Even calling it a lagoon sounds horrible. So that would be, so always look for the role of government and the role of the industry. If you are a broker, a stockbroker, or securities broker of some sort, you need to know that fraud, potential fraud, and insider trading are the ethical challenges in your industry, and you don't want to get caught up in that. If you are a CFO or a CEO, remember you have to now certify. I'll add that up to there. You now have to, since Enron, certify your financial statements. You have to sign them. And more than anything, that's in case you're falsifying it, that's to a jury. Oh, but Mr. CEO, your signature is right there on the financial statements certifying that they're truthful and accurate. And that's very powerful to a jury, because before that, they'd all say, well, I'm only the CEO. I don't know anything about finance. That's my accounting guy. All right. Corporate is corporate culture. Talk always about profits, but also talk about culture in terms of cutting corners, meeting deadlines. With Takata Airbags, their culture was to lie and cheat, wasn't it? I mean, straight out lying and cheating. In a lot of the ones with the outsourcing, we see them putting, profits first and saying, look, we can't control what goes on over there. True, but you can use your economic leverage, since you are getting the benefit of cheaper labor and so forth. You can use your economic leverage to insist that the people on your product be paid more and have safe working conditions and hours and so forth. And then the individuals. If there are any individuals named, use them in your CIMAC exam. Then you would go through the two models and then apply the models. And then after applying the models, what's the last thing you do?
Maximum profit or long-term profit.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And your conclusion too, right? But yes, you all did a good job on recognizing in the dairy case that they were looking at short-term maximum profit. And a lot of times it's not only those poor individuals who died so terribly, it's also, the farm owner, dairy farm owner, Patrick Faria, lost everything. Was he not able to figure out that the risk, what was his risk reward trade-off? All right, but that I'm not asking you. So I will add conclusion, and I will add the profits to this sheet. So I'm going to modify this sheet so you can take a look at it one more time, but it's up there as like this right now. All right, so I divided the cases up into potential harms to three different groups: the employees, the consumer, and the investing public. So Denny, that's why, back to your question, right, as to you don't know which specific purchaser is connected to maybe your transaction, but the idea is that the victim is the investing public that is making decisions without the knowledge that you have. And it could be they're making decisions to buy or sell. All right, so the cases with the harm to employees, right? Nestle, we talked about, Foxconn Manufacturing, the Apple phones and iPads and things like that, and the dairy case. I think those were the three primary harm to employees cases. Then the harm to the consumer, going all the way back to the Pinto. Remember, the Pinto case is discussed in chapter 2. So you want to make sure you go back and take a look at that. The Takata Honda case, we have the information available under articles and cases in your beach board. We have the Boeing articles there and Mattel. And Mattel was an example of something, a mistake. There was not, a high degree of recklessness. They had in their contract, don't use lead paint, but there was still lead paint around in China. And that's what the manufacturer of the toys used. And so, but Mattel came out and remembered the 3 messages. What were Mattel's 3 messages that I always say to you? What if there's an ethical lapse, a non-intentional ethical lapse? What are the 3?
They apologize. They say what went wrong and then what they're going to do to change it.
Right. The public will forgive you. The consumer will forgive you. If it's non-intentional, unintentional, and you give those 3 messages. So your stock price might drop in the immediate, but it comes back in the longer run, and you don't end up necessarily going bankrupt. The other thing about Mattel is they disclosed it early enough that not that many consumers were harmed. And they, ran an ad campaign. I told you now Honda has been doing that in recent times. Okay, so let's see. And then to the investing public, Enron, your assignment was to watch the smartest men in the room. And also there's information about Enron in your securities PowerPoints. Aaron Bean in your textbook, the Disney Insider Trading, I posted documents, and Martha Stewart. Any questions? Any general questions on any of this?
I have a question for the midterm.
Yes.
Can we talk about the format?
Yes.
So I understand the first portion is going to be SciMac minus S. And
Right.
For the second portion, you covered a lot of things. Is it going to be one short answers, or is it be multiple short answers?
It's going to be one short answer with potentially a couple of issues.
So it'll be like a mini case. Okay.
So we're covering the ethics in the SciMac, right? But we've also learned a lot of law, since law is a response to ethical lapses. And so all the law that I put on that midterm statutory review, you're responsible for that. And it will be a direct question about the law.
Oh, okay. So this is answering. Okay, I got it.
Any
I
other?
have a question.
Sure, Michelle.
For the SciMac, so when you say models, you're referring to cost benefit and then the rights.
Correct.
Can you kind of go over universalizing and reversibility again?
Yes. So here's what it is. And all of you forgot this. I realize in the dairy case, when I gave you the question, because I didn't put in the words universalizing and reversibility, only one person, who I'm looking at right now, actually put that in their answer. Okay, so after the cost benefit, then you look to see what rights are being harmed. And often it's a fundamental human right. It could also be the right, and here's why we have ethics in financial reporting, the right to not be defrauded. That's what the right is. So it's not that it's a right to your money, because you can gamble your money away if you want, right? But it's the right to not be defrauded. That means to have accurate, truthful information when you make your decisions to buy or sell a security. I thought my doggie was with me. Okay, so then after you state what right is being harmed, right? Then what I did, I took from Kant, is I thought, you know, people need something more than just their gut reaction. They need some concrete way to apply the rights model. So I took from Kant universalizing, that you can get a gut feeling about whether something's right or wrong by asking, what if the whole universe did this? What if the whole world did this? Right? What if the whole world lied to us about safety of products we use? Products that can kill, like cars or airplanes. What would that world look like? We wouldn't know whether to get on an airplane and travel, or right? And so the idea is universalizing. What if the whole world engaged in this conduct? And as I said to you in the red flags, lying or cheating in any way is usually a red flag to unethical, potentially illegal conduct, right? So that's universalizing. Reversibility is a direct me to you. So for example, in the Pinto case, right? Would the Pinto executives want their children driving Pintos? Right. No, right? Probably not. Would I want someone to, or direct someone to do this to me? So instead of the whole world, it's reversing between two people. If I did this to you, then would it feel all right for you to do it to me? Lie, cheat, expose me to risk of serious harm, you know, exploit my labor. And by the way, one of the things in the dairy case that we see is that we think of exploitation of labor being often these other countries when we outsource. But we do indeed have exploitation of labor going on in this country. And particularly it's in the immigrant population who does the most hazardous work, typically, and often comes in for, you know, the farming community has lots of risks of harm, and people come in for the harvest and then they go back, and, you know, they feel they're illegal and they feel they can't really complain. And I think I told you, this is just anecdotal, meaning just a story, but the thing that impacted me forevermore when I was around your ages, I was 21 and I was working in workers' compensation. And the very first case I got was a farming case in the San Joaquin Valley. And it was a young, first of all, 15-year-old girl. And she was in the fields, and her hair, because they didn't require hair nets and things, her hair got caught in the picking machine and she was scalped in the field. Horrible injury. And I thought, this happens at this point in our history? So we need to, as a society, pay attention. I saw many cases in my workers' compensation days where people were doing the hazardous work and being exploited and having the worst injuries. So that's just a little of my preaching and where it came from, but I think about that young girl. All right. Michelle, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So we're just like kind of talking about that then, kind of how you like described it. If we
Yes.
were to get to the case.
The universe, well, if everybody, what if the entire
Okay.
universe, what if everybody did this, what would society be like?
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
And then, yeah, reversibility. If I do this to you, then it would be okay for you to do it to me. And if that doesn't feel right, then you know that that conduct's probably. And that's part of also, Danny, to go back to the victimless crime in insider trading, is that, right, on some level, you are lying and cheating the investing public when you have material non-public information and you're trading. So there is someone out there that's being defrauded, even if you can't name that specific person. And, you know, typically, no matter how sophisticated the lie, Enron had very, very sophisticated lies. But what convicted them was their insider trading to a large degree, because the juries could understand that, and the massive sell-off of their securities 2 months before filing for bankruptcy. Any other general questions, comments?
So for the midterm, are we aiming for kind of the same length as our SIMAC for the dairy case?
Are we aiming for the what?
Like the same length of the assignment?
Except that you won't be doing stakeholders, and you will instead be answering a law question. It should take you, to do a good job, the full hour and 15 minutes. And one of the things I would say generally about the homework is that the people that got better grades wrote more. Because what am I ultimately looking for in the homework or in the exam? The development of your critical thinking. And you are all smart. Here you are at Cal State Long Beach. It's not easy to get into this university. You're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And let's face it, you know, what employers need from you most when you graduate is critical thinking, because memorization doesn't help very much in the working world. Any other general questions, comments?
For the exam on Thursday, do we show up to the Zoom first or do we go straight to lockdown browser?
There will be a beach board email to you with the instructions, would be what I'd say. And I'll make sure that, you know, it may be coming from, we have someone for my department that does that for us, which is why you see me go, But we will be getting in touch with you through Beach Board of how to do it. Any other general questions or comments? It's nice to see so many faces today. Thank you very much for coming. And there's just such a connection now between your names and faces, because you focus on the person when you grade their homework. All right, you can go if you are done. And do you want to go back over the last few slides of the ethical financial reporting, or would you rather just go? Let's see, I should have it here. Let's see if anyone wants to stay for it. So all women.
Can you give me a list of rights? I mean, because I feel like I don't know as many, and there's like a lot to memorize.
There are. So here are the ones that you would need to know for this exam. Okay. Okay. Let's think of what we talked about. We talked about the right to life. And these are typically drawn from philosophy. Some are drawn from our Constitution, which drew from philosophy. Okay, so that's why, you know, ethics is part philosophy and kind of part law. Okay, so the right to life, the right to be free from serious risk of bodily harm. The right to safe working conditions. the right to a decent wage. Some of these are in statute, some are in international law, but they are pretty much universally recognized, except by international law, not necessarily by specific countries, as we've seen. All right, what other rights have we talked about? We talked about rights in criminal procedure, right? We talked about the right that you're protected, that police need to get a warrant to search your house or person, which is the right to protection against search and seizure. But we also talked about the fact that there's a big exception to that, and what is it?
Probable
Car law.
Okay, first of all, Nicholas, you are correct that probable cause is what they need to get the warrant. They can't just go to the judge and say, I want a warrant, right? Because I don't like this person. But that rather they have to show probable cause. But what else? What was the other answer?
The car.
The automobile exception. That's right. The automobile exception, right? You give up some of the rights you have in your home to be free of search and seizure when you go out on public land, whether it's in protest or whether it's using the roads or what have you. And so, yeah, the automobile exception. Okay, what other rights do we talk about in criminal procedure? We know you have the right to a jury trial, right? If it is a criminal case. Now, sometimes there's juries in civil cases, but we're not going to get into that. All I'm holding you responsible for is that in criminal cases, you have the right to a jury trial.
So we don't.
Go ahead, Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we don't have to worry about the Miranda rights?
Well, these are the Miranda rights.
Oh, okay.
The right to remain silent. Right. The right to an attorney. And then, of course, they have to, before they interrogate the person, they have to remind them that anything they say can and will be used against you in a court of law, which is another way of saying the Miranda right. The right to remain silent. Then last but not least, we talked about the right to not be defrauded. Do you have your hand up, Ashley?
No, it's a picture. Sorry.
Oh, okay. There was a hand there. Sorry, Ashley. All right. That was a very good question, Denny. Thank you. Thank you. Probably everybody had that question as well. Anyone else? Remember, if you have the question, probably someone else does too. So don't be shy. See, Nicholas wrote, thank you, Denny. You moved the needle, Denny. You always do that. You move the needle forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
The rights that you just listed are
Yes.
different than the rights that I had written down from when we went over it the first time.
Which time, criminal procedure or these general other rights?
When we were going over the CIMAC slides.
Okay. You mean like what's there? The right to education?
Yeah, education, clean learning environment, dignity, free from, I guess we did that one, liberty, information.
Mm-hmm. Which is the right to not be defrauded, but yeah, the right to trusted information.
I guess that was it. So is education one of those, or?
Yeah, yeah. As an educator, I believe education is definitely there, and it is in some of the international treaties of the International Labor Organization and of the United Nations. So we don't specifically have that in our Constitution. We do have it in statutes, though, that require that we offer education to students for free all the way through the end of high school.
Should we put freedom of speech as well, or no?
Yes, we didn't talk as much about protest and speech as would be fun if we didn't have certain topics we had to cover, since there's a lot going on with protests right now and protest on both sides of issues. And protest is important. And having two sides to an issue is important, right? It's violence and looting and so forth that then goes beyond our right to express our speech into criminal behavior, potential criminal behavior. Any other general questions? All right, I'm going to take a momentary break, run to the restroom, then I will be back for office hours if anyone would like to ask me other questions. Thank you, class. This is great. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Good luck with the exam. You're going to do great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.